Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission I'm embarked on with a bunch of other booktubers, where we're reading Star Trek fiction. The many, many hundreds of Star Trek fiction novels that have come out in the 50 years since the show started. So we started out in August with the original series, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And we moved on from there to Star Trek The Next Generation, which has been an experience for me, an education for me, in learning all kinds of stuff that I did not allow myself to learn the first time that I paid any attention to the show. Then we moved on to Deep Space Nine, which is an iteration of the show that I really like. I really enjoy how it moves. It gets more and more comfortable painting broad-scale Federation history. But boy, oh boy, did I not like the novels. I've read one bad novel after another. Sometimes it'd be so desperate to have a good novel that I'd read two in one night, and one would be worse than the last, to the point where eventually, at the end of that month, at the end of October, I just started reading other nonfiction selected at random because I couldn't bear even to think about Deep Space Nine fiction. And I also deleted all the Deep Space Nine novels from my tablet. But November has been better. November, we're moving on to Star Trek Voyager, which is a show that I dearly, dearly love. And remember liking a lot of the books as well. Its premise is unusual for Star Trek, just a bit. It does have the normal structure of a ship moving from planet to planet and adventure to adventure. But the ship has a goal. USS Voyager was flung by alien technology across the galaxy in the first episode. They were out hunting in the Badlands for a terrorist group called the Marquis. Specifically one ship, which was captained and crewed by a couple of people who were ex-Starfleet and had joined the Marquis resistance, and also it buried incognito in their crew Janeway's 100-year-old Vulcan security chief, Tuvok. Voyager was on a mission to find them when they and Voyager were flung into the Delta Quadrant, 80,000 light years away from Federation space. And all of a sudden they have an overriding mission, which is to get back home, set a course for the Federation and get back home. It'll take a long time, a lifetime, even at maximum warp, even if they do nothing else. But they are going to do other things because they have a different mission, right? They have two missions. And one is to get home, but the other is to explore, to seek out new life and new civilizations. That is the Starfleet ethos. They can't just abandon that because they're in the Delta Quadrant. Although it does make things harder. We mentioned in the last time that one of the questions that comes up right away, at least it came up right away for me when I was watching the show originally, was, well, how are you going to resupply? How do you even know that dilithium is available in the Delta Quadrant? How do you know that it's not metallurgically unique to the Alpha Quadrant? And you need dilithium. Your dilithium supply is not going to last forever. How do you supply everything else? What if some extremely complex chunk of navigation or environmental controls breaks? Something that you would need a starship dock to fix. You don't have anything like that in the Delta Quadrant. What are you going to do? Are you perhaps going to use your superior Federation weaponry to take what you need? We actually saw that. We see that in a Voyager episode, a very good 2-part Voyager episode where they encounter another Federation starship, the Equinox, whose captain Ransom, and his crew have slowly, by subtle stages, devolved into not only preying on weaker species to get the material that they need in order to survive, but also in committing an ongoing act that is just horrific against one particular alien species. Just a horrific, horrific act of xenophobic exploitation. A sin. In Captain Janeway's eyes, a sin that Captain Ransom has allowed his ship to do. And another question that comes up in the minds of viewers when they were first watching Voyager is, well, the Delta Quadrant, we don't know much about it from Star Trek The Next Generation, but we know one thing, that's where the Borg come from. So sooner or later, Voyager is going to meet the Borg, and they do, many times. Many times. By the time Voyager is over, Catherine Janeway is known as the Federation's foremost expert on dealing with the Borg. But one Borg in particular joins the crew. The Voyager encounters a Borg who used to be human, who was assimilated as a human child, and goes by the designation of 7 of 9. And they sever her from the collective, much against her will, remove most of her Borg implants, cause her hair to regrow and all that sort of thing, and gradually, rockily reintroduce her to what it is to be human, to have friends, to have interests that are individual to herself. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. It takes all of the personal elements that were present in I, Borg, the Next Generation episode where the crew also disconnects a human drone from the collective and calls him Hugh. And Hugh has to make a choice at the end of that episode. But it stops you, that episode, it stops you, the viewer, and it gradually stops almost everyone on board the ship from looking at Hugh as a Borg. Instead, they start to look at him as an individual. Well, the 7 of 9 plotline might have started for cynical reasons. I'm pretty sure that it started in order to goose the ratings. But it was that kind of storyline, only given the time that it needs to develop. What would happen if that were true, if you did that long term? 7 of 9 joins the crew. And it's a terrific, terrific performance by Jeri Ryan. Just amazing. Do all of the praise that it has received. I know that it was probably done for cynical reasons, and it was certainly received cynically. Critics and watchers of science fiction on TV commented that Jeri Ryan was very attractive, that she was very shapely, and that maybe that was not by accident. Maybe that was not by accident that all of those traits had been chosen, and that they're going to be duplicated in Star Trek Enterprise, as we'll be seeing. And all of that might have been justified if Jeri Ryan hadn't done such a great job, but she does a great job right from the beginning and right to the end. I think probably the writers went to 7 of 9 too much in the half of the show where she is a member of the crew, but you still get great stuff every time they do. And so I thought I would read a novel, because just like the show, the novels are also split. Do they take place before 7 of 9 joins the crew? Do they take place after? So I went to Christy Golden's novel, 7 of 9, which tells the whole story of Annika Hansen, tells the whole story of the girl who was 7 of 9 and what her life was like in the collective, what her parents were like, what her internal experience is like. And Christy Golden and I have an uneven relationship in Star Trek. I sometimes like stuff that she writes, sometimes I can't stand it. And this novel, it isn't a failure. I have yet to have a failure when it comes to Star Trek Voyager. But this was the first Voyager novel that I've read in November that I didn't flat out love. It's competently done, and there are attempts made. There's also a kind of a plot. It's not just a backstory of 7 of 9, there's a kind of attempt made on Christy Golden's part to try and imagine what 7 of 9's internal state would be like, which we don't ever get in the show. I guess all of that was very earnestly done. Certainly I didn't want to stop reading, but I honestly do believe that this character is a creation of TV. I without Jeri Ryan's performance, I don't know that the show gives us enough to go on to write a book inside 7 of 9's mind. I don't think the show gives us enough of that to go on. So, and if you're going to do that anyway, even though the show doesn't give you that to go on, you're going to have to step away from a lot of what resonates with the show, if that makes any sense. I read it and I liked it, but it made me want more. It made me want something different, which is, not good if your mind is wandering from a book into something else. Like, for instance, I kept thinking, when I was reading about 7 of 9, I kept thinking back to an inept magazine TV critic who was talking about the change in the addition of the cast here of Jeri Ryan to the show, and said that you wouldn't expect a starship that was fully crewed and on its way home, on a desperate trek home, to start picking up passengers willy-nilly. I remember reading that line after all this time, because it bugged me even then, and this book got me thinking about all the passengers that Voyager's taken on, starting in the very first episode when they take on Neelix and Kes, 2 inhabitants of the Delta Quadrant that they just pick up. And the Neelix stores his own ship in their shuttle bay, and they just become de facto parts of the crew. That those are the first additions to Voyager, and 7 of 9 and Neelix and Kes are by no means the only ones. 7 of 9 eventually rescues a group of children from the Borg, severs them from the collective, starts to introduce them to humanity. Some really good performances there. The Equinox, the starship that I mentioned, Janeway defeats it. She hunts it. She hunts the ship relentlessly in order to defeat it and bring it to justice. Of all of the canonical 5 Star Trek captains, I think Janeway is probably the one you least want to be personally angry with you. and once she's done that, and eventually the ship is destroyed, of course there's no second starship wandering around the Delta Quadrant, but some parts of that crew do come off. Some members of the Equinox crew are taken onto Voyager. They are additions. I have a fascinating story there's never time to delve into it. Utterly fascinating. Another way that you could say that Voyager has taken on passengers is that they take on all of those Maquis. Not just a couple of those Maquis, Chakotay and B'Elanna Torres, adapt really well to Voyager. They were ex-Starfleet. They recognize in Catherine Janeway a figure that they want to follow, that they want to obey, and reacclimate really well. But we know perfectly well from early episodes of the show that not all of those Maquis do acclimate well. We don't get as much about them, aside from just one. Seska we get a lot about, but others we don't get much about them. And I'd like to. I think that's fascinating. And also, there is the most wondrous passenger that is added to the crew, and that is Naomi Wildman. Ensign Wildman has a baby on Voyager. The first member of the Federation to be born in the Delta Quadrant, Naomi Wildman. And Ensign Wildman is a human woman, but her husband is a Katarian. They are semi-armored. They have horns on their heads. The baby, Ensign Wildman, does not. Ensign Wildman's baby, Naomi Wildman, is born with tiny little horns on her baby head. And she grows up on Voyager. Talk about another narrative lost opportunity. I liked very much that Naomi Wildman starts to fixate on Seven of Nine. Seven of Nine becomes a kind of de facto parent to her, probably because they're both fish out of water on this vessel. Both of them didn't expect to be there, and also the point in the show is really well done. The point in the show when Naomi Wildman and Seven of Nine specifically start to bond is the point in the show when Naomi Wildman is about the age that Seven of Nine was when she was assimilated by the Borg. That's never hit on really hard, but it's done really well. So you see what I mean? If you're wandering far afield thinking about these things instead of thinking about the book you're reading, then maybe the book just didn't. It didn't do it for me as well as a lot of the other stuff that I've read for BookTrek in November. So I'll have to hope for more tomorrow, because I will pick a book at random tonight. I picked this because I was curious to know if Seven of Nine would be interesting to read about, just like she's interesting to watch on the screen. For me, not so much, but maybe I just haven't found her. Certainly the first Voyager books that I read for November, String Theory, in those books, Seven of Nine is beautifully done. Just beautifully done. Better than in this book, which has her name in the title. But that's as you go. You can't predict these things. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. That's my BookTrek for today, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.